1. My husband and I went camping for the first time ever in Arizona as part of our long trip out west. I had picked out this really cool place that was on a mountain overlooking a beautiful landscape. It's next to a cliff and in a really isolated location. I'm talking like 20 miles out on gravel roads in the middle of a national forest. So we get there and set up our tent, and hike a little bit and take pics of the surrounding area. We see a few cars parked around 2 tents and decide to stop and talk to other campers nearby, because we had heard that there was going to be a bad storm that night. These were 4 guys who were from Arizona, and they told us not to worry and that the storm didn't get that terrible around this area. That was all the persuading that we needed to stay. Later on, while walking a bit further down the campsite, we see a woman with her dog and another older lady. We smile and wave and continue to hike down a bit further into the forest. Let me elaborate that because of the storm, we are one among maybe a total of 7 campers that decided to stay and withstand the night. We watch the sunset when we get back to our site, make sure our car was only a few yards away, and go into our tent when it gets too dark to see. There are no stars tonight, due to the storm clouds, and it hasn't begun to rain yet. So we decide to try to sleep right away, so that we could possibly sleep through the storm when it does hit. It is an insanely windy night, so it is hard to sleep. But eventually we get a bit of shut-eye. I wake up at 10:30 p.m. to the sound of some crazy thunder rolling through the mountains and rain hitting down in our tent. I'm a little freaked out because they get a lot of flash floods out here, and I didn't want to fall off the side of the cliff. But I tell myself to try to sleep, and eventually I doze off again. It's 12 a.m., and I am awake again. This time because I hear something heavy hitting the side of our tent. Like full-on sounded like someone could have been punching our tent and sliding something down the side of it. I open my eyes and can't see anything. It's completely dark, no light whatsoever. The sound continues every couple of minutes, and at this point I'm shitting bricks. Suddenly I hear footsteps right next to my side of the tent. They are slow but steady. I feel my entire body freeze up. I seriously start thinking about how this is it, and I am going to die. My heart is beating so fast I am certain whatever is out there can hear it. Then whatever it is lets out a deep sigh right on the opposite side of the tent. I'm thinking it is a bear and realizing that I might actually have to face this thing. So in a desperate call for my husband's mind-reading powers, I squeeze his hand really repetitively, and he wakes up. But instead of reading my mind, he blurts out, "What's wrong? Why are you squeezing my hand?" Right as he says this, the footsteps stop. I don't hear the footsteps again. So after a while, I break out of my frozen state and tell him what I heard. We decided it may have been an animal passing by. But whatever is hitting our tent continues every so often, and I'm starting to go a little insane from this night. Wondering what is going on, we convince ourselves that it's just pines falling from the trees above us and try to sleep again. We just need to make it through one night. Then we can laugh about all of this in the morning. A couple minutes go by, and suddenly our tent caves in on my husband's side, right on his head. He whispers that it feels like something is pushing the tent down. I feel my heart instantly sink. I'm freaking out, thinking it's a bear that just sat on his head. But he decides to push back, and we hear the familiar noise of something sliding off of our tent that we've been hearing for the past few hours. We then realize that it's been snowing outside, and that the noise we'd heard hitting our tent was heavy ice falling from the trees onto our tent. Our tent is covered in thick ice, and my husband pushes the tent from the inside until all of the ice slides off. Still determined to make it through the night, and a little relieved that it was just ice and not a bear, we try to sleep and make it to sunrise. We keep on a small light that my husband, luckily, brought with him just to calm us down a little. Things are starting to seem normal again. We both close our eyes. It's 3 a.m. at this point. Not even 30 minutes after we are settling down, my literal worst nightmare happens. Out of the pitch-black night, we hear a woman screaming. We distinctly hear her say, "What the fuck? Oh my god, what the fuck?" followed by some other non-tangible words that sound something like help. The way she screams doesn't sound like anger. It sounds like pure terror and a sense of panic. My husband and I are both frozen looking at each other. I quickly shut off our light and start panicking and asking what we should do because... WTF? How is this really happening right now? While we are trying to decide what to do for the next few minutes, we hear her again. But this time she is screaming, "No, no, 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 no!" as we hear a car speed off into the night. I am in tears at this point. We have no idea what is happening. It's dead silent now, save for the icy rain hitting our tent. It definitely sounded like she wasn't in the car, but more like she was desperately yelling after it or begging not to be hurt. And this was the breaking point. Because I could take the bad weather, I could take the possible bear outside my tent. I could even take the ice falling on our heads in one of the warmest states in America. But one thing I cannot and will not ever be able to handle is a screaming person in the middle of the pitch-black woods at 3 a.m. We decide to get the fuck out of there, and even contemplate leaving our tent and booking it to our car. But instead we try to stay level-headed, and grab our valuables and put them in the car first. We frantically gather our things and stay close as we shuffle to our car. I close the door and keep the lights off for a while, scared to attract any unwelcome visitors. And while my husband goes back to grab the tent, I start the car and call 911. I tell them what I heard and where we are, and they say that they are sending someone to the campsite to make sure everything is okay. Only thing is, we are literally in the middle of nowhere, and it will definitely take them more than an hour to arrive. Not to mention, the storm left loose gravel roads in some pretty terrible conditions. So my husband and I decide to start driving, and it's like 3:30 a.m. now. As we drive out of the campsite, my husband notices one last eerie detail that stuck with me. The 4 guys that we had talked to earlier had left. All 3 of their cars were gone while their tents remained. Whatever scared them off, they sure left in a hurry. It was only after we started driving that the thought occurred to me. Whatever was walking next to my tent may not have been an animal. It very well could have been someone lurking around in the dark, who decided to go after the girl we had seen previously on our hike. I'm not sure what went down on that lone mountain that night, and I hope that everyone got out okay. So whatever was at our campsite that night, terrorizing us all, let's not ever meet again. 2. What a naive, credulous girl I was. I had received a message on Instagram from a guy named Frederick. I looked at his page and saw that he attended the same university as me. Fred and I get to talking and we become internet friends. Even though he attends the same school as me, we live far apart from each other, as I live off campus, and he lives on. And our majors are completely different, so we never are on campus in the same areas and at the same time. Fred and I end up exchanging phone numbers, and we continue to talk daily. He had so many funny stories to tell about misadventures he had with friends of his. How regardless of his major being in engineering, his real passion was photography. Fred tells me after a month of daily talking that he thought I'm a lovely girl and would like to take me on a date, to which I excitingly agreed. Huge mistake. Me being a fairly busy person, I haven't even had time to go with my girlfriends, let alone go on a date. I was so excited when he asked me because I'm pretty sure that the last I was asked on a date, people were unironically still using the word rad. Being all giddy and gross, I got all dolled up for the date, wearing one of my favorite dresses, my pheromone-fused pumpkin spice-scented perfume, and, of course, ruby woo red lipstick. I haven't gotten dolled up for several months, and I was ready to look good again. I ran to my car and drove off to meet him at a local hotspot Italian restaurant. When I was driving to the restaurant, I heard my phone's text sound bing an unusual amount of times, but me, being a responsible driver, decided to not check my phone until I'm stationary. The whole drive took about 10 minutes. When I arrived at the restaurant and parked in the lot, I had 9 messages. "Hey, I'm looking forward to seeing you in person. If we don't have chemistry and the date goes south, can we still be friends? You're honestly so much fun to talk to. I'm worried you won't like me. You're such a beautiful, sweet, and smart girl, and you're way out of my league. I hope I'm good enough for you. I really don't want you to stop talking to me if the date goes bad. I have abandonment issues and will be hurt if you ghost me. Do you promise, Victoria? Also, I do get jealous sometimes, just so you know. I'm sorry, did I creep you out? I didn't mean to. Please don't ghost me. Victoria, are you mad at me? Did I say something to offend you? If I did, please let me know so I can apologize. I really like you." Winky face. I was shocked when I saw these messages. I had never seen this side of Fred. I decided that maybe he's nervous about the date, and this is him showing that. So I decided to continue with the date. We had reservations and I got there on time. But he arrived 20 minutes late. He didn't mention the messages when he got to the table, so I decided not to either. Tossed it aside as, "That was an embarrassing moment for me, sorry." But we've all had those moments, right? Right? He apologized for being 20 minutes late, to which I acquiesced. He seemed quieter than I imagined, however. And usually I'm more of a listener, so I get him to talk by asking him some questions. I had asked him, "What was the best day of your life?" I know that's a hot question for a first date, but this date was seriously not going anywhere and I needed to get it somewhere. He recounts the story of a time he and his ex-girlfriend, Delilah, went around the inner city to give sandwiches they had made to homeless people. Fred's whole demeanor changed after mentioning Delilah. His aura changed from stiff and closed to open but sullen. God, I regret asking that. He goes to talk about her, how they met, where it all started for 4 hours. By the 3rd hour, the restaurant staff were eyeing us. He started from the beginning, and that they met in high school, when she had helped him solve a math problem in their algebra class. His high school sweetheart. He had told me all the stories, their adventures, her jokes. I felt like a therapist. The way he talked about her, although very romantic and detailed, was very awkward for me to listen to. He talked about how her eyes were bluer than the sky in summer's daylight, and how her wavy blonde hair would bounce when she would walk, and how she smelled like sweet vanilla. How was I supposed to respond to this? I was so over it at this point. I honestly knew more about Delilah than about Fred, even though we had talked for a month. So I was getting fed up, and had to say something. Clearly he's still heartbroken over this angelic woman, so I must know, how long ago was this? Maybe asking him this would make it too painful for him to continue. They broke up 5 years ago. That's not even the best part. He had told me, while on the edge of crying, "We had to break up because she was moving to a city very far from here. We promised to still be friends. She came back to visit a year later to see her family, and she wasn't the same. She was a punk rock lesbian. My beautiful angel, her beautiful long blonde hair that shined brighter than gold, was short and a crimson color. The short, innocent, cute dresses she wore were swapped out for spikes, mesh, and black chunky boots. And she was dating a girl. My angel. I miss the old her so much." I had no idea how to respond to that, so I rushed us out by making an excuse that I really want to pay, and I needed to do something at my apartment. When we walked out of the restaurant, he looks at me and says, "Do you want to go to my dorm and—" I was taken aback, but not so much so. As how can you be when you've been hearing this guy talk about how he misses his once sweet, anarchist lesbian ex-girlfriend of 5 years ago for 4 hours? Me being my polite self say no thank you. He became obsessive after the date. He would text me a lot, but in combination with me being busy as well as turned off by him at that point, became less responsive. I didn't ignore him because I would have felt bad doing so, but I wasn't as eager to talk to him. My breaking point was when he asked if he could call me Delilah. I said no thanks, and that apparently really offended him, so he started attacking me, saying how I was cold-hearted and just another heartbreaker. Okay. I had enough and blocked him on my phone. Shortly after, he had started messaging me again on Instagram, begging for me to forgive him. But I'd had enough at that point, so I blocked Fred on there too, and haven't seen or heard from him since. I'm sorry your girlfriend moved away and became a punk rock lesbian, but seriously, Frederick, let's not meet. 3. 6 years ago, I had just graduated nursing school. I had not gotten my certification yet, so while I studied and waited for my test date, I worked as a CNA. I was living with my fiancé, who is now my DH, but he had just graduated from school with his sports broadcasting degree, and was working a paid internship which paid like crap. So we were living in a one-bedroom apartment in a not-so-great neighborhood. The complex also was Section 8 housing, as well as housed offenders when they got out of the local prison. Something we did not learn until after we had already lived there a few months. However, we befriended many of the residents. Our neighbors to the right, a young single mother on Section 8, with 2 kids who worked 2 jobs, became a very good friend. We still keep in contact with to this day. One neighbor to the left was an ex-con, a guy named Ramon, that worked at a bakery. He often brought us bread and donuts that he got from work. Then Jake moved in. He resided in the unit across from us. I was home the day he moved in. I was outside our apartment sitting in a folding chair, reading a magazine, enjoying the nice spring day. The first thing I noticed was that he had an electric monitoring bracelet on. He also was a scary-looking guy. He was only 5'8", but had long, greasy blonde hair, a pock-marked face, and his facial tattoos put Post Malone to shame. He saw me sitting there as he moved things into his house, and came over to where I was sitting. I grabbed my magazine to go into the house, and he started talking to me, just polite things, and so I decided to be nice even though my red flag meter was going off. He introduced himself as Jake, and I gave him my nickname. Not my actual name, but what others call me. He started asking me if I lived alone, and other more personal things, so I gave a hasty answer of no, my fiancé lived here as well, then excused myself. I noticed he was still standing out there, just staring at my door. So I quickly closed the shades and went to watch TV. Later on, when my fiancé was home, I told him about Jake and how he was staring. My fiancé told me to just be careful and that he would walk me in from work, as we both left at the same time. For a while, things were good. I never saw Jake, and I think fiancé ran into him once. Then I ended up passing my nursing exam. I also got a better paying job. Fiancé was hired by the network he was interning for. Things were looking up, and we found an apartment we could afford in a nicer part of town, with a doorman and everything. We bid adieu to the complex, and the friends we had made there, and moved into our new place. I thought my days of ever seeing Jake again were over. One day while working my job in the busy ER, I saw a familiar face. It was Jake. He had taken an overdose of meds and was on a 24-hour observation. There was not a room available for him, so he was kept in the ER. I went in to take his vitals, and he recognized me. He went off on me about how I moved out without saying goodbye and how much he missed me. Just crazy things, being that we barely knew each other, and had really only talked that one time. I explained myself to the charge nurse, and she got someone else to babysit him, as I did not feel comfortable. After my shift ended, I headed out to my car, and I was about to get in when I saw Jake walking briskly towards me. I got in my car, locked the car, and started it by the time he made his way over. He started hitting the car, banging my trunk, and slapping the windows, shouting at me to open the goddamn door. I drove off, but not before he got one good kick into my bumper. I was terrified to go to work, and for a while I insisted that security escort me to and from my car. 3 months had passed with no sign of Jake, I started realizing, and I walked to and from my car by myself. One day I'm heading to my car when someone bumps into me, like they were trying to bump my hip, But I am only a tiny 5'2" and was 110 pounds at the time, so I lost my balance and went flying. I twist my ankle and I'm grabbing it. When I look up, ready to tell whomever it was off, when I see it's Jake. His hair had been cut, but he looked manic, and he was staring weirdly at me. I hit the panic button on my car and he took off running. After that, I went to the police. I got a restraining order against him. He ended up breaking the restraining order by approaching me again at work, this time thankfully when I was around several co-workers. He ended up going to jail for breaking the restraining order and breaking parole. He was released last year according to his parole officer, who contacted me. Thankfully we live in a state away from there now, and he never knew my full name. So Jake, please, let's not meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 337. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. It is a sleep-deprived Hellfreezer that greets you today. Yesterday's video, also recorded on the same day, also a sleep-deprived Hellfreezer, because I have had a guy today come in who was doing the annual safety heating inspection. Didn't keep me waiting too long, so that's fine. He came, got that done. But it meant not a lot of sleep for me, and then I had to wake up and get that spare room tidied up, and I've got it done now. It's not pretty, but it's at least accessible. So a good chunk of the rubbish is away, and I'll keep getting the rest of it done, and I basically need almost everything out of that room, to be honest with you. I might turn it into an office. So that the guy who's coming on the 16th can measure for new windows, which apparently I rent my house from the local council, and every now and again they decide they're doing these programs where they're going to upgrade things, and apparently the windows are getting done, even though I really only think the ones upstairs need doing, but seemingly they're all getting it. So that'll be lovely. Lots of disruption, so the guy's coming tomorrow to measure for that, although I'm hoping they won't actually do the installation till after Christmas. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.